got all of our samples made for our project that we're going to be stamping for the homeowner to come in and choose the colors. We did 3 different samples, one having a solid color, the second one having 2 hardeners, the third one having 3 color hardeners. Then we have 2 different color releases, a medium gray and a nutmeg over the top of all 3 of them. And all said and done is the homeowner liked our 3rd sample with the 3 color hardeners and 2 powder releases on it for her color scheme. So let's go see if we can replicate this on our slab. Okay, we're getting ready to start pouring our mud. Our concrete truck is here. We're going to be pouring a 3/8 6-sack concrete mix today. The reason being is that I want a smaller aggregate and a higher concentration of cement for my concrete for stamping purposes because of the grout joints in our mats that we are stamping today. We want to make sure we've got a smaller aggregate so that we get a good impression around those and we don't have a lot of fractures due to big rocks. So let's start pouring. Okay, here we are at our slab. We've got it all laid down, screeded off now. We've got this windy day upon us and the sun shining on us, so we want to make sure that we use the magnesium bull float when we seal this off because we want to retain as much of the bleed water as possible coming to the surface so we can broadcast our color hardener on the surface, get it colored out and wet out so that we have a good solid surface. So we're going to go ahead and use our magnesium float now and float this off and get things all leveled out before we start broadcasting our color hardener. Now we've got everything all sealed up with our magnesium bull float. We've gone around all of our edges with a magnesium hand float, sealed up all of our edges, cleaned off our forms. Now we're ready to start edging. We're going to use our blue steel edger, not regular steel. Reason being is because of our wood forms that we have around our concrete is going to suck the moisture out of our slabs, so we need to retain as much moisture as possible in those edges. If we're using regular steel edgers, they would set up way too quick. So we want to make sure we're using blue steel edgers to keep them open and keep the moisture coming through that slab. The slab has been floated off. We've let it set. We're trying to get the bleed water to come to the surface. We've touched and feel the slab and we notice that it's starting to tighten up a little bit. With this wind coming across here, we don't have the bleed water coming to the surface that we'd like to have, but we have enough here to throw our first broadcast on. And so we want to make sure that we got our safety equipment. We have our rubber gloves, we have a dust mask, our safety goggles before we start applicating. Next, we'll move over to our color hardener that we are going to broadcast. It is a sandstone color hardener, and you want to make sure that you check these batch numbers on your bucket to make sure that you have a consistency of those batch numbers in the lots of buckets that you have. If you have a large project, make sure that you get a batch that is consistent with the batch numbers to do a large broadcast over this surface. Next thing is, if you do have a variation between these batch numbers, on the top of the lid, it will tell you to mix these multiple batches together to make sure we got a consistency of color, just in case there is a color variation from one batch to the next, because there could be lot numbers that it could be a year apart that you have. Make sure you mix those together. Next, we want to make sure these buckets in travel and storage is that they've actually settled out. So we have sand, cement, and color in here. So we want to make sure we tip these buckets up, move them around, loosen all these aggregates inside these buckets, get them nice and loose before we open it. Then when we open our bucket, we will look inside and it'll be nice and loose. So I want to make sure our materials are nice and loose and have a fluency to them before we start broadcasting on the surface, because if we dip in and grab a big clump, throw it on the surface, it is going to leave a big brown or big dry patch that will not wet out. So let's go ahead and start broadcasting. We'll put on our equipment and start broadcasting the surface. We're going to go through 2 different variations of broadcasting. One is broadcasting by hand, get a nice uniform broadcast. The next is going to be with a bucket lid. and broadcasting, and you have to find your own way of actually broadcasting this that you're comfortable with to get a uniformity of broadcast. Now, not only with our broadcasting uniformity across the slab, staying low down and broadcasting across, we didn't want to be standing up and throwing the materials at the slab. We want to be down and low of the slab to make sure our colors and everything are actually getting to the slab and get a nice uniform coverage across here. Now, what we want to do is we want to make sure and throw out as far as we can to begin with, and then work our way out. Work all the way out from the center and come all the way back out, so that we make sure that we get reached out as far as we can first and then work back to ourselves. All right, now we've got a nice uniform broadcast of our color. You can see that it is all wet out. Our coverage rate is 100 square feet per 60-pound pail of our color hardener. And John had a full pail and I had a full pail. And we've broadcast about 2/3 out of each pail in our broadcast. So what we want to do is we want to put on about 60 to 70% of our color hardener in our first broadcast, and then we've got enough to come back and do a second broadcast before we get ready to start stamping. So we'll go ahead and magnesium float this off again, let it set and bleed, and then we'll wait and broadcast a second time. Okay, now we've got our broadcast on. We've both floated the colors in. John is just finishing up the edges on it. And you can see from Adam's point of view down on us is that we've got some gray spots showing through our color. That is fine because we were 60% broadcast in our first broadcast. Now when we come back and broadcast a second time, we have the opportunity to cover those areas up. Now we're getting ready to do our second broadcast, and we know from the feel of our concrete is that underneath it is starting to set up and catch up with the surface, but our surface has a little bit of crusting going on over the top because of this wind that keeps blowing across here. So now we're going to take our evaporation retardant that we have mixed 9 parts water to 1 part evaporation retardant, and we're going to mist the surface of the slab before we broadcast. So let's go ahead and spray the slab and do our second broadcast. We've got our base color of the sandstone. Now we want to go through and throw on another color of Pecos Sand and a desert tan. So I know from our sample that we have made that the best variation was all 3 of these colors broadcast together. So on our second broadcast, we're going to go ahead and put on a base coat again of the sandstone. Then we're going to highlight over the top of it with Pecos and desert tan. Okay, now we've got all 3 colors rebroadcast on the surface of the slab. And because again, we feel the wind blowing across it, John is going to put a small amount of the evaporation retardant again over the surface of the slab to make sure that we're not wrestling with our floats when we start troweling across here. My tool to use is the blue steel on a walking trowel. Biggest thing is I have a little more control over the marbleization of my colors than I do over a Fresno. So this is my favorite tool for troweling in these colors on my last broadcast. So let's see what we got. Now we got this entire surface all sealed off with our blue steel trowel. Kind of scanning it across to see the modeling effect of the different colors with our base color of the sandstone still showing through to give us our variation. So we're going to have 3 different variations in color hardener. Now we're getting ready to go ahead and start stamping using our powder release.